Welcome all to Astrology Night, the astrology for September, can you believe it, September 2016. This is August 31st, is that what it is? August 31st, 30 days has September, yeah, August 31st. And you know we're just a few hours away from an eclipse of the sun. Do people know that? Then we have a new moon at 2:03 a.m. that's Pacific time. That'll be 5:03 a.m. Eastern time on September 1st. And so tonight we have an eclipse of the sun, and we'll be talking more about that. In fact, we are in the midst of eclipse season. Remember the old Jeopardy show where they said, you know, we're going to double Jeopardy, where scores can change and anyone can win? Well, that's what September is all about. September is double Jeopardy. Everything can change and anyone can win. So, before I move into the astrology of this month, and we have some very interesting things to talk about. We have eclipses and Mercury retrograde, and the last of Saturn Neptune square, and lions and tigers and bears, oh my, and all kinds of stuff going on. But there's a few things I need to say to start off with, and one of them has to do with the amount of response that I had from last month's astrology night on YouTube. You probably know that this gets recorded. Thank you very much, Julie. This gets recorded and put up on YouTube. And last month we had 54,000 people who came to Soul Food without even buying coffee. So thank you to all of you out there in internet land. And when you ever make it to the Pacific Northwest, make sure you take the trip over to Redmond and stop in at Soul Food for your cuppa. Last month I talked a little bit about the charts of the two presidential candidates, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and I can't believe the amount of flack I received from both sides of the fence, or is it a wall? And some of the flack that I received was basically saying, you're an astrologer, you should be neutral, you shouldn't let your opinions come through. And to those people, I say, thank you for your opinion, but that's bullshit. I am an astrologer, but I am a human being, and I do have my opinions. And although I have to say that even last month when I talked a bit disparagingly at times about Donald Trump, and disparagingly, but maybe not as disparagingly as much about Hillary Clinton, you know, it's, here I go. I'm just going to get myself into more trouble. And I don't want to talk about the lesser of two evils just because it's a political process. But I do want to address these people because I do appreciate this feedback. And I did not, on the YouTube channel, there were many, many comments, and I did not take any of them down, even those which differed from my point of view significantly, because I do believe that living in a quote-unquote democracy, and I say quote-unquote democracy because it's maybe the illusion of a democracy, but living in a country where there is free speech, and that there is, I think it's really important to listen to both sides of any argument. And I would suggest to those people who disagree with me that that's perfectly fine for you to disagree with me, but I still get to say what I want to say, and you still get to say what you want to say. Unfortunately, what I found in a lot of political debate, and maybe this is true when it comes to anything that's very close to home, politics, religion, family, you know, core beliefs, and that is that often information doesn't change someone's perspective or point of view. I know what is true, and I'm not going to let reality change my viewpoint. And I'm not saying that from my point of view, although to some extent I am probably as guilty as anyone else. It's just that my viewpoint is correct. Said tongue-in-cheek. And so I don't want to dig in too much further on this topic. I just want to acknowledge and honor those people who did strongly disagree with me. And even though I disagree with their disagreement, I respect their ability to say what what they have to say, and I think we should go on. By the way, I'm not going to talk much about presidential politics tonight. Not because these people scared me off, but I think I'm going to wait until after eclipse season and after the first debate at the end of September, and I think that next month when we get back here, I think I'll have a lot more to say about the presidential race, regardless of where it's going or who has shot themselves in the foot. And without saying who that might be, because quite frankly I don't know, the fact is that we have 2 eclipses in September and a Mercury retrograde, so it's not unlikely that one or both of the 2 candidates will in fact shoot themselves, in the foot or some other place in their body. Who the hell knows? Enough on presidential politics to start off with there. No, not quite enough. I find it absolutely fascinating that Donald Trump would hop on an airplane and go visit and have a talk with the president of Mexico, and to set up a major speech on immigration on the day of an eclipse and a stationary Mercury. He obviously does not have an astrologer. That's all I can say there. Without knowing where this is going or how it will play out, it's just obvious that that would not be a well-timed event. The other thing I want to talk about before we jump in, and I'm going to go through these very, very quickly. I will put on the YouTube version links for more information, but a couple of things that I have coming up. The ESAR, the International Society for Astrological Research, is holding a major conference down in Costa Mesa, California. That's Costa Mesa, not Costa Rica. We'll get to Costa Rica in a moment. But this conference is October 13th through the 17th, and it's on the power of forecasting. I will be doing one talk at this conference, but there will be many other astrologers there from all over the world giving talks, and you can find more by going to the ESAR Astrology website. The second thing I want to mention is the online conference called Breaking Down the Borders. This is the 4th annual Breaking Down the Borders conference, and this is November 18th through the 20th. This is a very cool conference because you can attend the conference. There are 48 top speakers from all over the world, including speakers from New Zealand and Australia and South Africa and England and Canada and all over, and you don't have to leave home. You can go to it in your pajamas or less, just don't tell me. This is on the internet, and it's astrologyconference.org. More information, again, the link will be over there or over there or over there on YouTube, depending upon where there's room to put it. Third thing is I will be the featured speaker at the monthly Washington State Astrology Association. This is one of the longest running statewide astrology associations in the country. It meets the second Thursday night of every month and has for close to 40 years now, I think. I'm a past president of that organization, and their Christmas meeting will be on December 8th, and I'll talk more about my talk then, but this will be a non-technical talk and a talk in some way about the astrological origins and meaning of Christmas and the Christmas star from an astrological point of view. Then comes the big kahuna. Yeah, that's a Hawaiian word, I think, isn't it? The big kahuna, the big wave. And that will be India. Goa, India, registrations are coming in. That event is an absolute go. We have space, we have, I mean, it's happening. There are a few people here who are attending. Yay! I've been doing astrology talks and conferences and retreats for many years. I've never been so excited about one. This is called Experiencing the Spiritual Dimensions of Astrology, and it will be in Goa, India. This is on the coast. The place we're staying is on the beach. Everything is taken care of from, you get off the plane, getting back on the plane. After the 9-day retreat workshop, we will be taking a 5-day trip to Hampi, which is in old central India. And our ringleader and the producer of this conference is the same woman who's done conferences in Bali and Mexico and England, many of which I've actually led. And she has been doing this conference or a retreat in India for several years now. So she knows the ropes, knows it will be in good hands, I guess is what I'm saying. Anyone who's thinking about doing this should begin to think about it seriously now. I'm talking to you here in the room, aside from those of you who have already paid. And those of you on the internet, if you're interested, send me an email if you want to talk about it and what it entails. Evelyn Roberts, who's the producer of the conference, is also accessible by phone, by Skype, to talk, and we're going to have a great time. And I would love to see you there. That's India in January, and then we have the NCGR, the National Council on Geocosmic Research, conference February 16th through 19th in Baltimore, and that also is going to be a major conference, especially for you East Coasters who are watching on YouTube. Find out more about that by following that link there or there, wherever it is. And then last but not least, I foreshadowed, I think that's the correct literary term, when I said Costa Mesa, that's in Orange County, south of Los Angeles, and I said not Costa Rica, we'll get there in a moment. Well, we're there, and on May 6th, 2017, May 6th through the 13th, at the Flamingo Beach Resort and Spa in Guanacaste, which is on the ocean, on the beach, on the Pacific side of Costa Rica. There will be a 1-week-long astrology conference. This will be a relatively small gathering for a conference, but large for a retreat. There'll probably be about 100 to 125 people. I think it's capped at about 125 by the facility. And for those of you who know Tom Lesher, Kai Pacha, who lives in Costa Rica, will be actually doing the arrangements and putting this conference together. And as such, he will be speaking. Maurice Fernandez, Sol Jonasson, Julia Simas from Australia, Sol is from Norway. And there'll be Christina Caudle, Marcy Winters, a group of people from all over. Oh, Patricia Walsh, who does magical work on reincarnation, past life regression stuff. And so this is going to be an exciting conference. And if you're interested on that, you can look for Astrology Rising or go to the link that is in one of those places on the screen on YouTube. All right, enough of all this. Let's get into the material for the month, and thank you for your patience on all that. I've actually had a number of people that have written and said thank you for these monthly updates of where you're going to be and what you're going to do, because we like to know that. And then I've had other people who say, I don't give a crap about what you're doing, just get to the monthly. And to them I say, you know what? Chill. This is free for you. You can click ahead and not listen to it, but it's my YouTube channel and I can do whatever the hell I damn well please. To a point. All right. God, did I sound like an Aries or what? All right, we need some chairs for these people over here. You guys didn't get reserved seating, huh? We have a nice full house tonight. Julie, can you pan the room? Is that a right word, pan? Or does that mean like when you pan something you hate it? Well, if you pan a film, doesn't that mean like you don't like it? No, whatever. All right, so here we are on August 31st. We're looking at the month of September 2016, and we have a few major issues that we want to talk about this month. And I'm going to divide this up, although I'll go back and forth in between these issues. We have eclipses, Mercury retrograde, Saturn Neptune square, and the issue of Virgo. The issue of Virgo. Sounds like Tom Robbins on the back cover notes of Still Life with Woodpecker. He goes, this book takes place, it's sort of a love story that takes place inside of a pack of Camel cigarettes, deals with the differences between criminals and social outlaws, pregnant cheerleaders, and the problem with redheads. So we're going to deal with the problem of Virgos in the spirit of Tom Robbins. So there's a new moon and a full moon every month, because from Earth's point of view, the Earth is going around the sun once a year, and meanwhile the moon is going around the Earth once a month. That's what a month is. And in one given month, or 1 month, the moon will come between the Earth and the sun, and then 2 weeks later, it'll be on the opposite side, so that the Earth is between the moon and the sun. In most cases, the moon will be either higher or lower than the plane of the Earth and the sun. In fact, the plane of the Earth and the sun is defined by what we astrologers refer to as the moon's nose. Because if you take the moon going around the Earth, and you take the Earth going around the sun, those two planes intersect in a line. You know, if you think of, if you take two pieces of paper and can magically smush them together, they would cross, they would intersect in a line. And so the plane of the moon going around the Earth intersects with the plane going around, of the Earth going around the sun, and it creates a line. This line defines what we call the north node, or the ascending node, and the south node, or the descending node. And these are the points at which the planes of the Earth and the sun meet. Now here's the deal. Normally, that's not of much importance. Well, it is, but it's not something that affects what we see. But if there's a new moon or a full moon that's close to the north node or the south node, then we have an eclipse. Because if you think of it, the new moon, imagine the sun's right out there. And once a month the moon comes around, but most of the time it comes above the sun or below the sun. But every now and then, typically twice a year, it will come across the area where the sun is, and the moon will track across the sun, which means that the moon will black out the sun. A partial eclipse means that the moon blocks out part of the sun. A total eclipse means that the moon, at the perfect size, blocks out the entire sun. What we have happening tonight, here on the Pacific Coast at 2 a.m., East Coast 5 a.m., early tomorrow morning, is called an annular eclipse. Because the moon's distance to the Earth is not always the same. Sometimes it's a little farther away, sometimes it's a little closer. Well, this moon is a little bit farther away than normal, which means that as it comes across the face of the sun, instead of being a total eclipse, the moon is a little bit smaller than the sun, which leaves what they call a ring of fire. And it's sometimes referred to as a ring of fire eclipse. And the correct word for it is an annular eclipse. The actual eclipse path moves through South Central Africa. We don't have it visible here at all. And yet, nevertheless, eclipses are like they're like a new moon on steroids. What I mean by that is a new moon is a beginning, it's a seed period, it's the start of a new cycle. And here we have the chart. Excuse me, here we have the chart for the new moon in Virgo at 9 degrees of Virgo. And this doesn't show it, but this new moon is an eclipse. And so, in a way, eclipses rattle the energy. They're to go to the Star Wars metaphor, they create a disturbance in the force. I like to think of them as a polarization. It's like, imagine you have a dimmer on the only light in your home, and the light it's total blackout. It's a blackout room, and for 2 weeks you gradually raise that dimmer until the light in the room is as bright as it can be. And then at the height of its brightness, full moon, then all of a sudden someone grabs the electrical switch and turns it off and on. It's like, and this isn't meant as a disparaging mark for anyone who suffers from this, but it's like the sun having an epileptic fit. It's like it's like the nervous system going on, off, on, off, on, off. It's a polarization, and it creates this kind of uneasiness that often is Uranian. The planet Uranus releases pent-up tension, and often eclipses do the same. The ancients believed that when there was a solar eclipse, a total eclipse, it meant that the king must die. In other words, there's a shift of power structure. Nietzsche talked about what is called nihilism, which are those concepts that reach the absolute top of the mountain. The most important eventually have to fall. They have to devaluate and go to the bottom, where then there's reconstruction. And in a way, that's what a total eclipse does. And the thing about eclipses is that they're like time warps. They don't the result of an eclipse doesn't always occur on the day of an eclipse. In fact, I have contemporaries who study eclipses in birth charts way more extensively than I do. I mean, I note them certainly. And I am told, and I've seen this, that eclipses if an eclipse falls on a point in your chart that's active, let's say that you have a planet in your chart, maybe even the sun or the moon, at 8, 9, or 10 degrees of Virgo. And you see here's the north node of the moon at 12 degrees, that's why there's an eclipse. You could look at this chart and go, oh, this new moon is an eclipse because the new moon is so close to the node. If you have a planet in your chart at about 9 degrees of Virgo, or opposite that point at 9 degrees about 9 degrees of Pisces, or square 90 degrees to that point at 9 degrees of Gemini or 9 degrees of Sagittarius. If you have planets at any of those points that are harshly aspected by this, well then this eclipse has your name on it. It can stir things up in your life even more so. However, it can do it up to 6 months before or 6 months after, because that's when the next or previous eclipse occurs. Eclipses occur about 6 months apart. Typically they occur new moon eclipse, solar eclipse, followed by lunar eclipse, or vice versa. In this eclipse season, we actually had a barely almost lunar eclipse 2 weeks ago that was just nicked the edge of the moon, but it was technically astrologically an eclipse. Now we have a solar eclipse on the 1st, and then in 2 weeks we have a lunar eclipse. So typically there are 2 or 3 eclipses in a row, and they happen about 6 months apart. Point being that that if you have planets very close to this eclipse, then you can expect things in your own chart to be rattled even more, but maybe not today or tomorrow or the next day, maybe when other planets moving through the sky trigger points in your chart that then bring about this eclipse energy. But let's talk about this eclipse as to what it is and what it represents for all of us right now, because this eclipse is, how do I want to say this kindly? It's not a nice eclipse. It's, it has some difficulty attached to it, and astrologically, difficulty isn't always bad. It just means that we need to meet the energy and do something about it, rather than run and hide and bury our heads in the sand, because when we do that, our butt's exposed. Where did that one come from? I take that back. Well, it's just that if we go into denial, it typically makes things worse, astrologically and in our life in general. So here we have the sun and the moon, a new moon eclipse at 9 degrees of Virgo, and we have the North Node in Virgo, Jupiter in Virgo, Mercury having just turned retrograde a couple of days ago. Mercury turned retrograde actually yesterday on the 30th of August, and it will be retrograde for 3 weeks until until the 21st or the 22nd, depending on where you live. Mercury turns direct at 10:30 p.m. Pacific time on the 21st, which is actually 1:30 a.m. on the 22nd in New York. So depending upon where you are, it's the 21st or 22nd. But typically, it's not about the exact moment, because nothing in nature is exact. There's always a little bit, I like to call it the slop factor. There's always a bit of room for synchronizing of rhythms that are based upon the inconsistency or the inaccuracy of cosmic rhythms. So, we have Mercury retrograde. It turned retrograde at the very last degree of Virgo, and it will retrograde through Virgo all the way through, again, through the 21st or 22nd, back to 14 degrees of Virgo, and then it turns direct, and Mercury doesn't leave Virgo until, where did that go? Until October 7th. And that Mercury retrograde, people have been, people get worked up about Mercury retrogrades, how negative they are and how awful they are. And the fact of the matter is that that's just not true. It doesn't mean that difficult things can't happen when Mercury is retrograde. They can. But typically, like an eclipse, if something negative happens, it's a warning light that's going on your dashboard. It's basically saying, you haven't paid attention to this and you need to. I got a comment. I did a live feed yesterday from Portland at Tarot.com, and many of you know I write the daily column, the daily horoscope column for Tarot.com, and have for, geez, I don't know, close to 15 years. And I was down in Portland and did a live Facebook feed. That was a lot of fun. I mean, geez, somewhere around 10,000 people have already tuned into that. It's about a 40-minute presentation, but it's specifically on Mercury retrograde. And if you go to my Facebook page, and that's facebook.com/astrologer, there'll be a link to the YouTube version of what I did on Facebook Live yesterday. And the reason why I'm referencing it is I spent a lot of time debunking the myth that retrogrades are bad. Retrogrades basically increase the planetary energy. When Mercury is retrograde, it's closer to Earth, so the noise of communication is louder. And if we have bad communication going on, louder is not necessarily easy to deal with. But I had someone who wrote me or commented on the presentation yesterday and said, every time Mercury goes retrograde, something goes wrong with my car. Mercury retrogrades suck. And I said to this, I wrote back to this person, I said, I suggest that what this is telling you is to attend to your car before something goes wrong. Do you understand what I'm saying here? It's like we don't need to wait until we have the flat tire when Mercury is retrograde because we've been driving around on bare threads for 3 months. The same thing with, I had a massive computer, a hard drive failure on the day that Mercury turned retrograde. Not this time, but a few times ago. The good news was that for once I had it backed up. I didn't lose a thing. And so it's not about the bad news that Mercury brings, it's the reminder of what it is that you should be doing to keep your communication channels moving smoothly. Now, back to this eclipse. Mercury retrograding all month in Virgo is significant because in astrology, every planet relates to a sign, every sign relates to a planet. Mercury is the planet that relates to 2 signs, Gemini and Virgo. So when Mercury is in Virgo, it's even stronger. It's at home, it's in its own sign. It's humming and buzzing. So what's the deal with Virgo? And this is really what we need to talk about before I come back and finish the thoughts on the eclipse in Virgo. But Mercury retrograde in Virgo is upping the ante of this Virgo energy. And what is Virgo energy? Well, it's the time of year in the northern hemisphere when the seed that was germinating in Aries at the beginning of the cycle, that in Taurus began to gain structure, wood, twigs, and in Gemini, leaves, air, and in Cancer, fruit began to appear. And in Leo, it's the sun's out and it's all the flowers. And in Virgo, the energy is still moving outward, but it's moving outward slower and slower until the last degree of Virgo, when the energy is not moving outward at all, because in Libra, it hangs in the balance and begins 6 months of drawing in. This is the annual cycle of moving through the signs of the zodiac. Libra is the halfway point. It's that perfect balance. So in Virgo, what happens is the energy that's been moving outward ever since the beginning of the cycle kind of begins to compact itself. And it's not so much that it's going away yet, but it's the time in which we harvest, because there's as much live energy packed into small places as possible. What do I mean by that? Well, we harvest the wheat. We harvest the grain, the pulse. We take that, and that's what we then use either to plant again next year or for the food. So Virgo is about this fine-tuned precision kind of way of thinking or being. Mercury in Virgo is not about gathering information like it is in Gemini. It's an air sign. Instead, it's an earth sign, and in Virgo, Mercury is all about discriminating what information is useful and what information is not. It's the binary function of the universe. This is okay, this is good, this is not. This is not. It's the maiden holding the wheat. Do I look like a maiden? But you know, the symbol of Virgo is often the maiden holding the bundle of wheat, because it's about the separating of the wheat from the stalks, from the chaff. And it's the separating of that which is useful, that which we can eat, make into bread, or replant, from that which is just throw away. Now, the reason why we're spending time talking about this is because this new moon eclipse in Virgo captures this Virgoan energy. And this Virgoan energy is about making decisions of this is okay, this is not okay. This is useful, this is not useful. This is good, this is bad. We make these value judgments. And where do we make these value judgments? Well, we do it primarily in 2 places. One, we do it in our head. We do it in our brain. We decide what's okay. Logical analysis is a Virgoan function. We decide what's okay, what's not okay. However, we do it elsewhere in our body. Anybody know where we make that decision? This is okay, this is not okay? In our intestines, in our colon. Because in the colon, what happens is the good stuff, the nutrient, the useful material gets absorbed through the villi, through the folds of the colon, and then that becomes ingested and assimilated and used as energy in the body. The rest is shit. And we'll leave that for Scorpio and Plutonic talk when we get to Halloween time of year. Because the shit is what's excreted, that's what's eliminated, that's the hell realms, that's Pluto's realm. But in the colon, we're talking about the Virgoan act of discrimination of what's useful from what's not useful. And in fact, lo and behold, we go to traditional astrology, and Virgo not only represents the harvest and the wheat and the bread, and it also represents the digestive process and the colon in the physical body. It's the place where the body makes the decision. And Virgo is associated with hygiene and colonic cleanliness. And so that idea of diet and nutrition, the habits that we maintain are all Virgo related. So here's the deal. This new moon eclipse in Virgo, with Mercury retrograding back over Jupiter. It lined up with Jupiter a couple of days ago. Mercury lined up with Jupiter on August 22nd, going direct. And now as it's backing up, Mercury lines up with Jupiter again on September 2nd. And then Jupiter changes sign into Libra, which we will also talk about in a few minutes. And then when Mercury turns direct, it catches up with Jupiter for a third and final time on October 11th, but it does that after it leaves Virgo, moves into Libra, and catches up with Jupiter there. So this Mercury retrograde is not such a bad retrograde because A, it's in its home sign of Virgo, and B, at the beginning and ending of this retrograde, before and after phase, Mercury is lining up with Jupiter in a way saying, expand, make something good out of this, take the opportunity, make things better. I think of Hey Jude, which is a great Mercury-Jupiter song. You know, take a sad song and make it better. There, that. All right, so this new moon eclipse in Virgo is very closely opposite Neptune in Pisces and very closely square Saturn in Sagittarius. Now we've talked about Saturn and Neptune on and off for months, and we're going to talk about it now again because A, it's part and parcel of this eclipse tonight, tomorrow morning, and B, the third and final exact square of Saturn and Neptune. Saturn right now is at 10 degrees and 4 minutes of Sagittarius, and Neptune is at 10 degrees 40 minutes of Pisces, meaning that these are within a degree of being exact, and they're within a degree and a half of the actual eclipse itself. So this Saturn-Neptune thing was square the first time back around Thanksgiving. Let's see if I can say that again. Back around Thanksgiving time, the end of November of 2015. That was past one. Then on the retrograde phases, Saturn was square Neptune the second time, June 17th, this year, 2016. And they will be square the third and final time on September 10th. That's within this month, so we get to talk about it, 2016. Now, I know we've talked about this Saturn square Neptune before. I talked about it extensively last month because that square was being activated by other planets that were hitting off the conjunction and the square. Saturn was lining up with, Mars was lining up with Saturn. Mars is now past Saturn and is free to move to move ahead. We may feel like energetically less restrained, although now that Mercury retrograde is kicking in, we're wondering why the plan isn't working, why the brain isn't functioning, and so it'll take a little time until the end of September for that to play on through. But again, Saturn is about boundaries. Saturn, I think I talked last month about how Saturn was the cell wall. It's the structure. Neptune dissolves structure. Neptune is like alcohol that when you drink it, dissolves the structures. The stop sign says, slow down. No says, maybe. For the chemist, alcohol takes the hard edges of crystals that don't dissolve in water, and alcohol dissolves the structure. It's why we use alcohol as a cleaning agent, because it melts away the apparent boundaries of Saturn. And I've said this before several times here, and I'm going to say it again tonight, only because Donald Trump was in Mexico for probably I don't know how long the meeting was, but I'm sure he flew there on his own plane, went to a 15-minute meeting, and got the hell out. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it sounds good. All right. The reason why I'm mentioning that is that Saturn builds walls because of its need to protect and create boundary and create structure. We need structure. Without the cell wall, our body turns into mush. We have the cell wall is where consciousness arises. Boundary is where awareness, self-awareness arises, because at Saturn, at the wall, is where we define what we are versus what we are not, self versus other. So, and again, I think I mentioned last month, and I'll refer anyone who has not read The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton, this idea of how consciousness is actually not the function of the brain, not the function of the nucleus or of the DNA, but the function of boundary and of the cell wall. That's where decisions are made. Yes, no. We're back to Virgo. Yes, no. That's okay, that's not okay. You see, Virgo makes the decision of what's okay or what's not okay. Saturn is what makes the boundary that creates the barrier that allows the ion gate to open in a cell wall and the enzyme or the chemical to come through or not. Saturn is what creates the laws of immigration, and yet the idea that the dissolution of that wall, even temporarily, the opening up, is what allows someone to pass in and out, having a valid passport or whatever that may be. All right, so we have this Saturn square Neptune dilemma that is rampant in politics right now. Which side are you on? Are you on the side of protectionism and fear? And this isn't an all or nothing thing. This is a gradation, and there are certainly times when having a boundary and having a wall is absolutely required for life. And then there are times when the dissolution of that wall is absolutely healthy in order to merge with someone else, to have another point of view, to have compassion for another human being, because perhaps we really all are one. The illusion that we are separate is based upon Saturn. It's a good illusion. It's a damn good illusion. I like me, and I like you, but I like you being you, not me. That's Saturn. I mean, a healthy ego is Saturn. And yet, there are times when I'm with you where I don't want that damn wall in the way. And whether it's a physically intimate situation, or whether it's a friendship, or whether it's learning, or whether it's a teacher or a guru, having a boundary can get in the way of the most meaningful things in life. And so here, the Saturn square Neptune is about working that dance between the protectionism, fear, structure, stability, stasis of Saturn, versus the universal love, acceptance, compassion, imagination. You see, in imagination, in dreams, there are no boundaries. Nothing is impossible. And so it's working that, and this eclipse brings that stuff into focus. It brings it into the awareness here and now, which again is why, without making any judgment on whether it was a good meeting or not, or what will come of it, I find it fascinating that on a Mercury retrograde, that Donald Trump would go talk about the wall with the president of the country that is that he's trying to protect us from. Again, interesting how astrology works. So this eclipse, powerful, profound. Let's move on. We got a little more ground to cover, and we will get there. September. Also, the fact that this eclipse is opposite Neptune, let's not forget that this is about imagination. This is about, it's about John Lennon's Imagine song, that the dream here can create reality. As we move forward a day at a time, let's go to September 6th, where we have the Sun in Virgo forming a trine with Pluto. And this is a positive energy that allows us to go into deeper places. So if there are things that you've been exploring, whether it's been investigating your own feelings, something else, something that you really want to dig into around September 5th, 6th, 7th, making use of that Sun trine Pluto can be very useful. Then on the 9th, we have a major game shifter. And that is it on the 9th or the 10th? It's on the 9th in the morning. Jupiter moves from Gemini into Libra. Now, Jupiter is a 12-year cycle. It spends about a year in each sign. Even though we still consider it one of the, inner planets, inner meaning inside of Saturn, it's about expansion. It's so far, when we take the planet rhythms up through Mars, the planet rhythms are less than a year, or Mars, they're like a year and 3/4, almost 2 years. And then we jump to Jupiter, it's a 12-year cycle. And so Jupiter spends a year in each sign. And Jupiter is about, we can experience it personally, but it's about how we grow, how we expand. It's how we have social contract. It's how we relate to the society rather than to our friend or lover. It's a magnifying lens. It's about making things bigger. I find it interesting that the culture whose philosophy is most based upon the concept of social place, social contract. We're talking here Confucianism and the Chinese social order, where more so than any other country, it's less about the individual than it is about the social system. And Chinese astrology, which is not really astrology in the way we look at it, because it doesn't follow the movement of the planets per se. Instead it's about cycles and numerical cycles. But the fact is that your Chinese sign is based upon a year. And even though Jupiter doesn't exactly change signs every year on the same day, it's interesting that the Chinese culture uses an astrology that is based upon the Jupiter rhythm of 1 year for each sign, rather than what we do in the sun-based astrology that we do, which is a month for each sign. Anyhow, Jupiter shift into Libra, we'll be talking about this for weeks and months to come. But Jupiter has been in Virgo, where we've grown, Jupiter, expanded by narrowing our vision, by focusing on details. And now as Jupiter moves into Libra, Libra being the sign that's about restoring balance, Jupiter moves into Libra, and hopefully we will see a flourishing of diplomacy. We will see a more equilibrious attendance to the issues rather than this, that's okay, this is not okay. That's what Virgo's job was. When Jupiter was in Virgo, the big talk was, that's not okay, this is okay. Virgo. But as Jupiter moves into Libra, there's the sense of how can we find balance? How can we create equanimity between ourselves and our enemies? You know, in astrology, Libra is that partnership, but it's interesting that partnership in astrology is also related to marriage and open enemies. It's because there's an engagement that needs to find a balance. We're not talking about the secretive stuff that goes dark, we're talking about stuff that's in the open. And so as Jupiter moves through Libra, we might see more of that, we will see more of that. And of course, as Mercury goes direct and catches up with Jupiter in early October, we'll talk about that more next month. All right, so Jupiter changes signs, a biggie. The next thing that happens is on the 10th, the exact square between Saturn and Neptune. I don't want to stop and say a whole lot more here, other than in your individual lives, looking back to last Thanksgiving and trying to remember, even if it's going to your Outlook or calendar or daytimer, and trying to figure out or remember what the confusion was. What were the uncertainties that arose during that time for you personally? What were the decisions that you were needing to make but perhaps couldn't? And how did those decisions come back into consciousness back through June, when that aspect was again exact? And now, from this eclipse up through the beginning of the month, the aspect is on us again for the third and final time. And by the time we get to the end of September, this will begin to fade into the past, because that's the way these aspects work. We come up to September 13th. The Sun makes a 90-degree angle, a square to Mars. We have the Sun lining up with Mercury, retrograde, making a square to Mars, and this can be a bit problematic. Actually, a few days before that, we have Venus making a square to Pluto on the 11th. And so I think the 11th, 12th, 13th, in that period of time, it could be a bit problematic, because the Venus square Pluto brings up dark secrets and feelings that might not be easy to express and might not be well received. And then, as the Sun lined up with Mercury, communication of one's intentions, Sun, Mercury, Mercury retrograde, that I didn't say last week or last month or last year. Now I'm speaking it, and it's 90 degrees to Mars, and this can precipitate a bit of argument or dissension. And we need to be careful here about not getting so worked up over things that don't matter, because this is like a tinderbox that sets up a reaction so that we can have a fight over something that becomes a major issue, but maybe the thing that we fought about was totally irrelevant or unimportant. So we need to be careful and choose our issues toward the middle of the month. We move on toward the 16th, and on the 16th we get the second eclipse of the month. On the 16th we get the second eclipse of the month, and let's make this actually happen exactly. And we'll move this forward so that the moon and the sun are at 24 degrees of Virgo and 24 degrees of Pisces. And again, we have a situation where we have the sun fairly close, not as close, but fairly close to the nodal axis, to the north node of the moon. The moon in Pisces, the moon lining up with Chiron, and all of them not squaring Saturn like they were at the new moon eclipse on the first, but now they're squaring Mars. And what does this mean? We might see more action here. The first eclipse might be more difficult with dealing with issues. That's the one on the first, the new moon eclipse. However, by the middle of the month, by the 16th, Mars is at the focal point, at the 90-degree point, and now we might see an actual war of words. And this is interesting because in the American political scene, this is feeding up to the week where the first presidential debate. So I imagine we're going to see some very interesting fireworks that may have nothing to do with the political issues and may have more to do with the size of egos. The good news about this, though, is that there is a release. And the release is that Mercury is coming into trine with Pluto, again, being able to deal with those deeper, darker issues and bring them out into the open. And secondly, Mars, on the day of the lunar eclipse, Mars is harmonized or trining with Uranus. I think we're going to see some real fireworks here, and I think that the fireworks that we're going to see can actually clear the air a bit. Moving on, we have in the days following the eclipse. Okay, so Mars trines Uranus exactly on the 17th, but it's already in effect at the time of the eclipse on the 16th. And that eclipse is, the full moon eclipse, is at 12:05 p.m. And again, that's Pacific time. And then as we move on, by the 18th, we have Venus now opposing Uranus. And, well, let's go back here to a day at a time. We have Venus opposing, there we go. Sound effects were free. Venus opposing Uranus. And so I think here that this full moon eclipse with Mars trining Uranus and Venus opposing it, we can also see some interesting dynamics that shift in personal relationships, because Venus is the planet of love. It's in Libra. Venus in Libra in her own sign is powerful, is wanting to find what works through balance, through harmony, but it's opposite Uranus, which is the planet of sudden change. It's the planet of eccentric and do things differently. And that's the middle of September through the 17th. And then by the 21st, Mercury turns direct, which means that Mercury moves back as far as it's going to get in Virgo, back to 14 degrees, and then it begins moving forward. It will take several days for it to begin to gain speed again, but even around this last week of September, we may feel like things are finally moving forward. That energy has been bottled up in some way because we've been going over territory that the mind, Mercury, has already traveled. And now we're going forward, but we're still cleaning things up because it will take until mid-October for Mercury to be out of the area. Actually, it'll take until, what did I say before? October 7th for Mercury to leave Virgo and then move into new territory. And once Mercury moves into new territory, then it'll feel like the retrograde is in the past. But even when it's moving direct, we still may feel like deja vu. It may feel like we've been here before. On September 22nd, we also have a key point, one of the cardinal points in our solar calendar, and that is the autumn or fall equinox, when the tilt of the Earth is such that there's 12 hours of light and 12 hours of dark all over the planet. This is the fall equinox is the moment at which, from Earth's point of view, the sun moves into the sign of Libra. Everything's in harmony, everything's in balance. And that also reflects for us a time when we try to put our own lives more into balance and we begin thinking about what's going to happen over the winter months. Even though we still have all of autumn to go through, we begin to look ahead. And this equinox is very, I think it's very, auspicious, because the sun moving into Libra immediately comes in contact with Jupiter, the planet of bigger, better, and more. And in fact, the sun actually catches up with Jupiter on the 25th. The actual equinox itself is 7:21 a.m. on September 22nd. Remember, Mercury just turns direct on the 21st, or early on the 22nd, depending on where you live. And then the Sun lines up with Jupiter on the 25th. And now we kind of feel like everything is possible. We really feel like now we've moved into new territory and things have potential, things have changed. Also on the 26th, slow-moving Pluto turns direct. The outer planets are retrograde for 4 or 5 months at a time. Sometimes it's hard to even notice, but often when the planet changes from retrograde to direct, often there is a shift in the dynamics, and that Pluto moving forward may bring stuff that we've been hiding out into the open. On September 27th, Mars, which feels like it's been in Sagittarius forever. Why? Because Mars moved into Sagittarius early this year, back in March or April, and then it retrograded back into Scorpio and was in Scorpio forever, and then moved back into Sag. And finally, on September 27th, let's get there, Mars finally moves out of Sagittarius into Capricorn. And although Sagittarius is about movement into the future and movement ahead, and Mars likes being in Sagittarius, it likes being in Capricorn better than any other sign. In astrology, we say that Mars is exalted. It has dignity. It works in Capricorn. Why? Because Capricorn has calculated staying power, and Mars can get the job done. If you want to get to the top of the mountain, Mars in Capricorn can do it, because Mars gives it the physical energy, the red blood cell, the adrenaline, and yet Capricorn sustains it until you reach the goal. So Mars in Capricorn, I always say that if you have a hard job to do, let's say you're moving or you're redecorating your house and you need all your furniture moved, go down your list of friends and call only those who have Mars in Capricorn. Because if you have Mars in Capricorn people working for you, at 10 o'clock when everyone's ready to go out for coffee, the Mars in Capricorn will say, you know what, I'm just finding a rhythm, just bring me a cup back, I want to keep working. And then when everyone goes out to lunch, the Mars in Capricorn will say, you know what, I'm going to stick here, bring me something back to eat, I'll eat while I'm working. That Mars in Capricorn has the ability to... Does anyone here know that they have Mars in Capricorn? A few people. Can you relate to that at all? I mean, we might call you the workaholic. But it's that idea of once you get started with a goal in mind, it's pretty damn impossible to turn it off until you complete the job. Last thing of the month, and this is kind of like the opposite of a blue moon. You know, a blue moon is when there's 2 full moons in 1 month. Well, that's one definition of a blue moon. There's different definitions. It can also be the 4th new moon in a season. Anyhow, this month we have 2 new moons. On the 1st of the month, we had the solar eclipse, new moon in Virgo. And on the last day of the month, 30 days has September, on the last day of the month, we have a new moon in Libra, and this new moon, again, it's the first new moon of the autumn season, so it sets the tone for the weeks to follow. And here, I think the most important thing is, the moon itself is not making any major aspects. It's making a quincunx to Neptune, which kind of says we may have a little problem dealing with what's real and what's fantasy. And it's still close enough to Jupiter that it still matters, because there's still those big ideas. And so the ideas can be so big we might inflate them until they have nothing to do with reality. However, the good news is that Venus has moved ahead into Scorpio. Oh, we missed that. Venus moves into Scorpio on... Where did Venus go? Venus moved into Scorpio on... somewhere here. Ah, there it is. September 23rd. She snuck right in. That's what Venus in Scorpio does. Scorpio is often secretive. And why is it secretive? It's secretive because it's so intense and so passionate and so powerful, it often needs to hold the energy in, because it could be deemed inappropriate or deemed too much. You know, people with lots of Scorpio energy in their chart often learn early on in life that they don't say everything, because if they do, for some reason, their friends just seem to go, God, I didn't realize it was so late. I gotta go. You know, it's that a lot of people can't handle the intensity, the power, the passion that Scorpio can deal with, because Scorpio is about the transformation, the metamorphosis that happens when you don't, like a Gemini, just move on to the next thing. You know, the Gemini energy, and I'm not saying anything negative about anyone here who might be a Gemini, but the Gemini energy is off to the next thing.
True.
True. We have validation. Meanwhile, which could be perfectly fine, but staying with something, even if it's unpleasant, sometimes allows that to metamorphosize into something that's very powerful. And so as Venus moves into Scorpio, we have this intensity of what we want, of what we desire. And then, by the end of the month, at this new moon, which is not an eclipse, you see it's already a sign away from the nodes, Venus is forming a trine, a harmonious trine with Neptune, which in fact says fantasy works. Dream it, imagine it. It's romantic. Now, it's romantic about issues that are very intense. So you may be fantasizing someone's death that you've been hating for years. On the other hand, you may be fantasizing the consummation of a very intense and powerful relationship. Or you may be fantasizing the merging, because that Venus in Scorpio is very intense and very passionate, and with Neptune involved, there certainly is the fantasy factor. And of course, remember, the new moon in Libra, which we're still looking at, is all about relationships. Because Libra and Jupiter in Libra, which I didn't say earlier, there's the whole relationship aspect. I talked about it as the diplomat, or the diplomatic energy. But in relationships, there's always a me and a you. There's always two sides to the relationship. And so with the new moon in Libra and Jupiter lined up with it, we can look for good news from relationships. So that brings us all the way through to the end of September. And just a short recap, what I really want to say is that sometimes we are driving down the road and there are these long sweeping curves that there's no way we can see what's around the bend. We're at that point right now. I think at the beginning I said something about this being like double Jeopardy. Does anyone remember what the exact words were? Because at the end of every Jeopardy, they said, you know, we're going to double Jeopardy where scores, I think it's where scores can change and anyone can win. Or something like that. No one remembers? What kind of audience are you? Bail me out. No one?
We listen to your channel on YouTube.
Say again?
We listen to your channel on YouTube instead of watching.
But, so this month, it's not that there's any one single surprise, but there may be numbers of surprises. Mercury retrograde, remember, Mercury is the trickster. You know, Mercury, on the day he was born, snuck out of his cradle, stole some cows from Jupiter, I think, and then went back into his cradle and made believe nothing happened. He got busted. But Mercury is the trickster. It's the Kokapelli. It's that playful energy that kind of can be very mischievous. And when Mercury is retrograde, weird shit can happen. And in fact, with 2 eclipses occurring this month, that goes up even more. And then you add in that Saturn-Neptune square, because remember, Saturn is reality, or it's the illusion of reality. And Neptune is the reminder that reality is an illusion. And so we come back to whether we're looking at the reality show of the presidential election, or whether we're looking at it in our individual lives. We may find that things are not quite as we thought they were. So go out there, breathe, be safe, and remember, it probably ain't what you think. See you all next month. Thank you.